Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me, and welcome from the sunny Hastings here in England, and welcome to everybody from across Europe. Just to be clear, that all attendees are muted while the panel are giving their presentations, and afterwards there'll be an interactive session for partner updates when all attendees will be unmuted. And just to confirm, for GDPR purposes, this webinar is being recorded. Thank you. Now, we were hoping that Chris from MDAT in Greece was going to be here, but I don't think he's here at the moment, Manos.
Yeah, I'm asking my colleagues if he will come on or not. Yeah, but you can go ahead. When he joins.
So perhaps, Manos, if you can do your slot first, the purpose of the webinar, and then we can slot Chris in afterwards.
So, well, what we try to do with this webinar is to highlight some of the key features we identified in the workshop we had 2 months ago in Hastings on the 27th of March, and to share this information with an additional audience, additional participants from the partners and beyond the partnership, and to exchange this experience. Derek will introduce again the state of the art as an advisory partner from Bournemouth University. We have to examine the available solutions for low carbon transport in tourist destinations and look at the advantages and disadvantages as well. And as a result of this webinar, within the partnership, we have to arrange the staff exchanges that will take place in the next semester, the joint survey that will include in each destination, in each of the 9 destinations, the partner destinations will include the mode of, or the system, the preferred, or the system under study in each destination. And I have said before that it's better to focus on one possibility because we have limited resources and limited time to do this. So each destination has to focus on one possible solution that has to be low carbon and has to be for visitors, for tourists. And then the feasibility, the survey and the feasibility study will be addressed to this particular solution under investigation. And we'll look at the cost and benefits of these alternative systems, and this result will be, as you said, Kevin, will be available for to watch later on. Other people can view this webinar, and we'll draw some conclusions at the end where we go from here and what we can have in more depth, to look at more depth in some issues regarding this particular topic of low carbon transport for destinations. Okay.
Thank you very much, Manos. We still haven't got Chris on, so I'm suggesting that we go to Derek, if you're happy to do that, Derek, and you can give us an update on the state of the art, if that's possible, please.
Yeah. Yes. With pleasure. Can you all hear me? I've just unmuted myself. The transport. What I was going to say is what I'm going to talk through here essentially in terms of the plan is basically the I'm going to focus on e-mobility because that's what the Hastings workshop focused on, and the levels of adoption. But the point I wish to make, if we can move on to the contents page, please. The point I wish to make. Can we move to the next slide, or do I do that? All right. The point I want to make is that e-mobility is only a partial solution. It will reduce carbon. It won't reduce congestion, and it won't reduce the land take required for personal transport by car or whatever, it won't reduce the land take, the land necessary for parking, for road space, and so on. So moving on to the next slide. The transport contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is well established at about 25% of all European emissions. Moving on, what I'm going to do is focus on the second of these two, the technical solutions, the decarbonisation of transport. Clearly, walking, cycling and modal shift are important contributions. So e-mobility, we move on. E-mobility in particular, I'm going to focus, I think, more and more.
Derek, we've lost you. Derek, can I do a check that you're still here?
Derek, we can't hear you. Derek?
Can you ask Claudia maybe to go into here?
Derek? Can other colleagues hear me?
My control panel says I'm unmuted. I'm not sure why it's not coming through. I can't hear Derek.
No.
Claudio, is it okay if we go on to your presentation and try and sort out Derek's background? Can you unmute yourself?
Claudia, did you hear that?
Okay, fantastic. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Super. So,
Oh, Derek, are you back on now? No. Okay.
we will recap after, yes.
Okay. Sorry.
So here
Here we go.
a very brief presentation about the experience we had here in Madeira regarding electromobility with the two focus. One focus related to private cars and the other to public transport system. So here some figures of Madeira. So every year Madeira receive nearly 1.5 million tourists with an occupation rate of hotels of 70%. So, and with the constant flux of tourists along the year. The tourism revenue, as you can see here, is quite relevant. And for us is 1/3, more or less 1/3 of the economy represent our total GDP. So it's quite relevant for us, the tourism economy. Here, two brief graphs. So on your left, you have the tourist mobility modal share. So here you can see our tourists, if you see the green part, use a lot, so go by foot to visit the city and to explore the island. But we have this red slice of the pie, which is the rented car, which is 34%. So more or less 1 in 3 tourists use only the rented car to explore our island for tourist purposes. So this is quite bad news. And the other bad news that public transport company only collect 9% of the total tourism mobility. So it's quite low. On the other side, we have 27% the resident mobility, 27% use public transport, so it's quite good share that is decreasing year by year, but it's good share. And we have the problem of private cars, so quite general situation. So moving forward, here I can, super. So here our strategy in DESTI SMART to act in low carbon transport system. So here, as I told you, one of the double strategy. So one side of this strategy was to act to promote electromobility for private vehicles. So in this case, we had quite well-structured strategy. So the strategy starts from a Portuguese framework. So there is a national framework with a well-established set of incentives, a recharging point. And together with this, there is a regional strategy well-structured with the different activities of different levels and with clear objectives. So the objective is to achieve 30% of the total vehicles in the region electric. So it's quite brave objective. And how we are, we are trying to achieve the objective. One is through incentives in public company fleets. So public transport companies, municipality companies are now provided with electric cars. And this is a way to get more people more familiar with electric cars. At the same time, the government, the regional government purchase electric vehicles, not only for public companies, but also and create incentives also for residents. And now recently starting Porto Santo, which is a small island near Madeira, started a campaign for incentives. At the same time, the strategy was also focused on the network, so the charging network. And here we have public spots with fast charging facilities. Also the spread in hotels and public parks, the opportunity to charge electric cars. And as I told you, regional incentives. Now, speaking of public transport, which is more familiar for my company. Yeah, here a very brief introduction. Maybe this could be interesting for everyone. So in Porto Santo, the regional government launched a very interesting project together with Renault to promote and to test electric vehicles. Very nice project. Maybe I can share with you later some data. Fiona, if you can move on. So as you can see here, the project is Smart Fossil Free Island is a quite extensive project. It includes not only electric vehicles, but battery pack to recharge, so to use, to storage the renewable energy sources during the night, electric charging networks, intelligent charging network. So it's quite interesting project at this very small island level, because Porto Santo is 6,000 people island, so very small island. I mean, 10 kilometers long, so very, very, very small island. And this is considered for us a laboratory, so a very nice pilot to test this integrate strategy for electric mobility in Madeira. Moving on, I will speak about public transport. So, and I will make some references to Civitas Destination, which is our another important project running now in Madeira. So, in Civitas Destination, we tested two types, or two kind of buses. One is a standard buses, is the City Gold, and the other was a mini electric bus, is Karzan. You can see here the photo below. If you move on, you can see, yes, you have the longer version. So the first photo is the standard bus, tested in December 2017. And the second is the mini electric, tested in September 2018 here in Madeira. Because for us, the transition to electric mobility in public transport is something that sometimes was forgotten. So public transport companies work with internal combustion engines. And the transition to electric engines is something that is not simple and not so easy. So the first step for us was to make tests in real condition. So going forward to the test. So here some figures. So maybe Fiona, you can show the video. In the meanwhile, I speak about, yes. So you can see the bus moving. So the strength of the test was regarding, as you know, the maximum torque as soon as acceleration occurs. That is typical of electric buses. So our drivers feel this total control as a positive, very positive element of these electric buses. The smooth acceleration and the battery charging also was a positive element during the test. Also, with the tourists, the appreciation, so the feeling of the tourists were very positive. So, and the experience of traveling by bus was improved a lot. Going ahead, the problems and something could be better. So the dimension, so the bus, the layout of the bus sometimes was not so suitable and not so adapted to our land profiles. Sometimes the buses proved to be not so powerful, but and this was a problem, can be overcome with more battery packs, maybe. The regeneration of braking energy sometimes was not so optimized, so not working well, so could be improved. And well, there is always this problem of the charging and plug-in and compatibility, and make the system more compatible to different technology, to different plug systems. Moving forward, we have some more information about the test. So the main conclusion. So we discovered that after this test, so the electric bus are technically feasible. So we show that the electric bus can replace a diesel bus with no problem. And also at a cost-effective condition. So because the study that the Agency of the Environment performed showed us that after so with no grant, after 7 years of running, we passed the break-even point. So we can have the advantage of less cost for diesel and the maintenance cost savings and so on. After 7 years, we passed the break-even point. So considering the energy saving and the CO2 emission reduction, this can be considered a good investment. We can tell that also the study, and I can share with you all these documents and deliverables. The study also showed that if there is a grant involved, obviously these times can reduce a lot. For example, in the case of ERDF co-funding that can reach 85%, the break-even point is reached basically after 1 year of the purchase of the bus. Moving forward. Here another interesting test we had in Madeira was with mini electric bus. This is a Turkish bus. We had 2 days experience last year in September, one in urban route in city center. We did 16 complete trips, and one route in a natural park outside the city center of Funchal. Also in this case, the bus proved to be very effective, especially in the path of urban area, but also in the natural park. And in this case, we have also a study related to the performance of this bus. The solution is not only technically feasible, but is also economically feasible. So in this case, the break-even is reached a bit later, considering that well, the number of passengers and the tariff earned are more reduced than standard bus. But also in this case, the break-even can be reached in a quite reasonable period. In this case, with no grant, we have a 16 years period to have a break-even. Moving forward. Well, here some results regarding comparison between electric and diesel bus. In this case, is evident the energy consumption reduced and the CO2 emission reduction also in this case is very, very high. So there are a lot of economies, are more expensive buses, but the break-even can be reached in a reasonable period. So this is, for me, is the most important lesson to remember. Moving forward. Yeah, here the same results, not for the urban route, but for the national, for the natural park link. And in this time, as you can see, the consumption was a bit higher because the place was more and the hilly place obliged to a higher energy consumption, but compared to electric solution, diesel is more expensive and produce more emission, obviously. Moving forward, Fiona. Yeah, basically here some conclusion. So as you can see, as we shown in the other kind of bus, in the standard one, so the two success, so we have the 2 points. So there is technically feasible and cost effective. And in both cases, we have very high advantage on environment. So in this case, as I told you, the break-even is a bit later, considering the dimension and the occupation rate of the bus. So there is a smaller bus, but the results are positive also in this case. There are some aspects that could be improved. For example, the battery capacity of the vehicles could be improved. But this more capacity brings to another problem that is related to the recharge. So high capacity battery needs a fast charging points, and fast charging points are more expensive, so all the investment has to be careful evaluated, because it's not only all the exploitation aspect of charge, discharge, parking areas, and the logistic of bus drivers has to be studied very, very carefully, because it's enormous change in your exploitation management. Also in this case, with the grant, the investment could be really interesting, yeah, and the break-even can be shorter and shorter. So for us, the support, the financial support, the funding support of ERDF could be essential to move on and to push for this transition, because for a private company it's quite difficult to risk so much and to take a so important decision. Moving forward. Thank you very much. And if there are some questions after, I can take your question. Thank you very much.
Claudio, I think we'll do questions at the end, if that's all right. There's a discussion session at the end, and I think it'd be useful to get through all the presentations first, if that's okay.
Thank you.
So we're just going to see if Derek's back on again or not. Derek, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can, sorry. So can we go back to where we were? Is that all right, Derek, or not?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. I don't know what happened.
We lost you, but we found you again.
My apologies. Right. Okay, so we can actually move on to the next slide. I'm going to focus on the purely electric vehicles, and actually going to comment on Claudio as talk there. The operators I've been talking to in terms of bus operation are giving similar sort of break evens to your calculation. They might say 8 or 9 years rather than 7, but they won't commit themselves that heavily because they're in the second year of operation, and that they are concerned that the actual battery degradation might be faster than the manufacturers think it might be. So until you've operated for 9 or 10 years, you don't really 100% know the break-even point, but that is a very fair estimate. I just thought I'd put that in as a contribution to the debate. If we move on to the next, slide, and I've put far too many slides on. Basically, what I'm going to talk about today is 3 levels of adoption, or I'm really going to talk about 2. I'm going to talk about the macro level, and particularly I'm going to focus on electric buses, and then I'm going to talk about the private car level. I'm not going to say very much about the micro level because I think this is an area where much more additional research is required, not so much on cycles and electric cycles, but on all the others, the micro scooters and things. So if we move on to the next slide. Clearly, the calculations for Thessalonica are that there will be significant carbon reduction from a metro system, not least the reduced traffic on the roads, meaning the remaining traffic will also be less congested and reduce that carbon emission as well as the transferred traffic. But moving on to the next slide on buses, the key thing I want to say about the bus network. Next one, please. So this is the garage in London at Waterloo I visited, and I'm just going to say a little bit about the London situation. All central London buses will be electric over the next 3 years. The interesting thing is that this is not been generated by concerns of carbon, although that is a factor. It's much more about local air quality, particulates, asthma, and overall improved air quality. And part of the cost benefit analysis of these low emission zones in big cities is actually the reduced costs on the local health service, as much as also the reduced carbon savings. Next, I think it's another photo of the London bus network, but yeah, but you can see here what we got is on a site where there are 47 buses, there are 43 chargers. And so one of the big constraints that I probably did not emphasize enough in Hastings is actually electric mobility has got to have a very good close liaison with the local electricity generator. It's actually going to increase the demand for electricity, the actual generating demand, not just substations supporting the bus garages where the buses are, but actually overall much greater increased power requirements. And that could be a very significant cost and a very significant time lag and barrier to the adoption of electric vehicles. It is an expensive option. It's not cheap. If we move on, please, to the next slide. At the moment, we've got a fleet of approaching 300 buses. As I say, it is going to be all buses in central London within the next 3 years, and that is because of the ultra low emission zone. Next. What I want to say about car adoption is 3 or 4 key points. And I want to add something since I was speaking in Hastings. Electric cars are very expensive to buy. The savings come with very low point of use savings. So it's very high capital cost, very low running cost. And the general consensus between academics and planners is that actually fleet cars that are going to be heavily used by industrial providers and car hire companies, enterprise, that sort of thing, and car share groups are where you recoup that capital cost within a reasonable time. That the individual motorist, the capital cost is very high. And although there are grants in countries like the United Kingdom, it's about £3,500 towards an electric car, it nowhere near compensates for the almost double price of an electric car over a normal car. However, what I want to report today, and I haven't prepared overheads on this because this is really very recent information that I've been picking up, is that actually the very low base of new cars, new electric cars in most European countries is actually being challenged in Norway. In Norway, new car registrations are about a quarter of car registrations, and there is an estimate that they actually will exceed traditional car registrations over the next year or 2 years. What happened in Norway is it isn't a £3,000 grant towards the cost of a new car. They've just completely reversed the tax system, so that not only are the new car electric cars very low running cost, but they are actually VAT free. And by making them VAT free, the capital cost is closed much faster than if it had just been a £2,000 or a £3,000 grant. And the view is that within 3 to 4 years, the car will have paid back for itself. And so we get in a very, very high utilisation of electric cars in Norway, which I think is an interesting development and something we ought to be looking in the EU about the taxation regime and maybe the purchase price of electric cars. If we move on, please. Obviously, car share and car clubs are very, very apt, and tourists do use them widely. The example I used here was Malta, where there's Go to Malta, but I can find multiple examples where you can, as a tourist, not just go to a traditional car hire company, but actually go into one of these car clubs, pick up a car at a set point, use a mobile phone to unlock the car, and that all works very well. Looking back on that last presentation, if a high percentage of that private car hire could be electric cars, then you start to address some of the issues of carbon emissions, although possibly not the issues of congestion. The next one, please. One of my real concerns, you can still hear me, yes? One of my real concerns on car hire is actually that it's not that it's not being sort of addressed carefully enough in terms of the capital and the running costs. The micro transport is, as I say, electric cycles and ordinary cycles, whether docked or undocked, has a big research interest, but there is very little being done on the micro scooter and that sort of thing at the moment. Next one, please. So micro transport, I have concerns about. Next slide, please. That's just some photos of the sorts of novel transport systems, as well as the e-bikes in the right-hand corner that I'm looking at. One interesting thing I found in London is, although we got the Santander-sponsored official bike scheme, there were actually quite a lot of dockless hire bikes that were unlocked by mobile phone apps being parked alongside them. So there are now 3 or 4 competing companies in London for the cycle hire market, not just the official original one. Moving on to the next slide, please. What I would like to really stress is this very slow base point of electric vehicles, which, as I say, has been addressed quite significantly in Denmark, sorry, Norway, where registrations are much higher. But again, it is going to put a lot of stress on the national grid. One of the issues with the electric cars, of course, is the consensus that charging points get fewer and fewer and further apart the further away you are from the city centre, and that is one of the real concerns, and that has to be addressed if there's going to be a higher level of adoption. Next, please. So what I was going to look at, just to sort of bring things towards a conclusion from that low starting point, was that actually there are some significant barriers to the further adoption of electric that have got to be addressed. One is got to be the car hire. One has got to be the availability of charging points. One has got to be the reducing costs. and overall, where if one is going to have cars being charged in roads rather than in the home environment overnight, there are real problems about the land take of cars being parked to be recharged on street. It was pointed out to me in no uncertain terms that if I owned an area of land and I turned it into a car park, charging for parking all day, I am going to earn more money on that piece of land than if I were in a situation where I was using that land for people to be charging up their electric vehicles. They would not pay as much to be parking and charging as they would be paid just to be purely parking. And therefore, one's really got to look at strategies. In terms of bus operation, I would just like to leave you with the thought that everyone I have spoken to is saying that electric vehicles need to have the capacity to do their daily work based on their overnight charge. That there is no great appetite from bus operators that I've spoken to recharge on street, topping up at some time halfway or 3/4 of the way around the route. It is suggested in EU policy documents, but I don't think that the operators think that is the appropriate way to go. So that's basically the key points I wanted to make, but only to stress that although we're at a very low point, we have recently had examples of where uptake is rapidly advancing. Buses where there are low emission trading schemes, cars where there are changes to the VAT and tax system. So there is real scope to push forward, but national policy is required as well as local action, the local action being providing appropriate charging and appropriate supply of electricity. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Derek, and we're glad we could get you back eventually. Thank you. Okay, that brings us then on to Carlos in Mallorca. Are you there, Carlos?
Yes, of course, I'm there. Hello. How are you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, all right. So, good morning to everybody. I'm going to present the low carbon transport systems for visitors in Mallorca. Who's moving the slides? Okay, thank you, Fiona. Basically, as I explained in Hastings, since this year we have a Climate Change Act, which sets up the goals and targets for the future in terms of transport and emissions. And in that respect, we see that already in 2025, diesel cars and motorbikes will be banned from roads. So only the ones already existing on the island will be allowed to circulate. And 10 years later than that, in 2035, all types of polluting cars or vehicles will be banned from the roads, except for the ones who were registered before. So that means that in, let's say, 20 years from now, the shift in the general traffic mix will be quite different from today. And a way to speed this up is through the car rental companies, which they are obliged to include certain percentages of zero emission vehicles in their fleets, starting with a 2% in 2020 up to 100% in 2035. We already are setting up a charging network. Today we have around 400 charging points on the islands, and also in places like Palma, which is the main city, there's a specific work carried out by the city council in order to increase the amount of charging points to deploy all these electric vehicles. Next slide, please. As Derek was saying, the electric vehicles might solve some pollution issues, but won't solve the spatial issues that we suffer from from transport. And as you can see these images, we are a congested island in the peak summer period, both in roads and around the interesting and touristic areas. And basically, if we substitute these cars, these diesel and fossil fuel cars by electric cars, we will have the same features. Okay, just that maybe the air is better. Next slide, please. So that's why we are focusing on trying to increase the public transportation offer in Mallorca, as well as to introduce cleaner vehicles there, which makes all in all a lot of sense. As a resume, I will explain that Mallorca has three main public transport systems. One of them is the train and railway, which have been electrified, as I will explain later. Then we have the interurban buses, which are run by private companies under concessions with the government. That's where I work. That's who I'm talking from. And then there's the local bus company in the city of Palma, which is actually the one that has more passengers, of course, because it's urban transport. It's around 40 million trips per year in the urban network. We have around 10 million trips per year in the interurban bus network, and then 4.5 million trips in the rail network. Next slide, please. This is also a slide to show how seasonal it's the public transport in Mallorca. As you can see, the peak it occurs between June and September, as in other touristic destinations. And that's why introducing electric vehicles or clean vehicles in the public transport, specific public transport routes of the island, it's a very touristic target strategy, so to speak. Next slide, please. We have conducted a series of actions to change the rail network into an electric powered railway. Until last year, parts of the railway network were operated with the diesel trains. And as you can see, since 2012 until this year, electrification of railways have been conducted with really important investments, as you can see, but also it has been giving a lot of benefits, especially in time and of course in noise and emissions. Next slide, please. This is just some images to show you the old, up on the left, we have the old diesel trains, and of course down on the right we have the new electric trains. And this old, beautiful historical train, it's an electric one, and this has always been operating, but not as a part of the public transport network. It's a touristic attraction. Next slide, please. Concerning the urban buses of the city of Palma, which, as I said, are moving the biggest amount of population of our network, this has been, it's an ongoing process to change from diesel to gas. So in this case, we still are using fossil fuels, but there's also a future project, an ongoing project of biogas production at the local level, meaning that probably in around 10 years from now, a big portion of the gas fed to the urban network will actually come from the gas recovered from the organic waste of the city. But until today, we have 10 years ago an introduction of around 54 CNG buses, sorry, 12 CNG buses, and this year they have purchased 100 CNG buses, which costed about 32.5 million euros. And as I said, they are based on fossil fuels today, but in the future, it's a nice possibility for us to reuse the energy we nowadays just waste in our water treatment plants and waste disposal places. Well, I'm going to start talking about the next slide. Uh,
Sorry, Carlos, we lost you for a second. We're back again now.
sorry. I just wanted, was just a picture of the CNG buses of the city of Palma. And please, can we move on to the next slide, please? So the core of my presentation is what's coming now, and it's also what we propose to be as a case study in Mallorca, which is what's going on with the interurban bus network. We have been carrying out a public tender, which I explained 2 months ago in Hastings, and during that time the tendering has been awarded. Now we have 3 winner companies who have each of them won a portion of the island. We have divided the island in 3 parts. And now there's, of course, all the administrative procedure. And of course, we unfortunately have also will have some delays because there are companies that lost that were claiming, and now of course the court needs to decide whether to continue or if we need to reconduct some part of the tender again. But basically we have 3 winners and we know better what's going to happen from January 2020, most probably. So next slide, please. In the tender we included a lot of technical details, so that the companies would have to offer things very, very in line with what we had been establishing. And basically we want a network based in CNG for the whole island, especially also because the routes are long, and in many cases operating with electric vehicles would not be feasible. Neither would be also in routes running in mountain areas because of power and consumption issues. And basically we selected 6 different corridors which have quite a lot of demand, and 5 of them are in very touristic areas to include electric buses. So the picture of Mallorca from next year will be a fleet of buses that run on CNG all over the island, plus 6 routes running with electric vehicles. Here we have the list, and we have mapped these routes. And now that we know what the winners have been offering, we have some updates on that, because originally we had been basically asked for hybrid technologies, except for in route number 3. As you can see, that was full electric. But finally we are going to have hybrid in all of the routes except for in route number 2, which the bidder and the winner offered 7 full electric buses, 12-meter buses. And in route number 3, which finally is going to be run with 2 full electric buses, 9 meters long. These buses, these full electric buses, will be charged at depot. And as Claudio was saying, that's good news also for all of us, because that is saving cost in infrastructure. We don't need to charge them at the end stop of each route, because they will be charged at depot. That was actually a crucial fact, because one of the end stops where we were planning to install a charging station on street was in front of the walls of the town of Alcudia, which are historically protected, and we had a lot of trouble to get permission to install such infrastructure there. So this way we don't have this problem anymore. And when these buses start operating next year, we believe we will have a lot of things to study. We will have a lot of interesting data, and in our feasibility study, we're hoping to cover all kinds of indicators to measure, both in terms of quality of service, perception from the traveler, but also in terms of consumption, feasibility, and all this stuff. Next slide, please. This was included in the tender, and we specified in detail for the hybrid routes in which parts of the route marked in green the bus should function full 100% electric, and in which parts of the route the vehicle could use a different engine, not the electric engine, let's say a combustion engine. So I want to stress that we have been doing a huge effort, and of course it's a very transversal team with professionals from different branches to include all this in the tender. This is a very public-driven process, and the intention to improve the air quality and the type of propulsion is being decided here. It's a political decision, and there's many ways from our side to impose that then to private operators that want to make business with these public transport routes. Next slide, please. So as you can see, this is what I basically explained already, but the full the network will be based on CNG buses. We offered 100 points of the beat to these items, to items related to low carbon vehicles, and that's why the winners are offering really nice solutions in this respect. We have also been taking care of the depots that have to be spread through the island, and we have made sure that the gas provider makes the network, the pipes, reach each of these locations so that there are no infrastructure problems when the new service has to enter in functioning. Next slide, please. And as a last part of the presentation, I know it's not the focus today, so I'm going to go really fast, but cycling and walking is also a low carbon transport system, and it's also a part of our strategy here in Mallorca. There are a lot of actions taken by each municipality, and I must say that we have seen a huge change in the last 10 years on the quality of the urban space here on the different towns and villages of the island. Biking has been taking up really a lot. It's actually among the three main tourist activities, I would say, and bicycle lanes have been extended all over the island, not only in the cities, but also in interurban roads. Next slide, please. Hello? Okay. And this is, well, how it can look for our friends in Latvia. As we spoke before, well, we also have been converting one of our old railways into a bicycle lane. And that's becoming a success. And as you can see in the next slide, please, the amount of bike lanes outside of the cities is growing, and it's quite big. New stretches of the road network are under construction to improve the quality of the biking on the side of the road, and of course the safety. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is more or less the same type of network. And the private sector is also increasing their presence and their actions in terms of bike providers, bike-friendly places like hotels and restaurants, and so on. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is very typical hotel room for bikes. Almost all hotels have it today in Mallorca with repair staff and a lot of things. Also, the cruise ships are a bigger portion of the tourism here every year, and they are also very tied to the bike thing. Even some cruises provide bikes to their customers when they reach the port. And many of the restaurants and bars have a lot of biking spaces, sometimes huge. And these are all things for tourists. You should always remember that. And I think that's all of it. So if you have any questions or any detail concerning the buses, which is the most important thing I wanted to present, I will be glad to answer you.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlos. We'll take questions at the end in the interactive section. But
all right.
Just an observation that Fiona and I have been saying that it's really interesting how Madeira and Mallorca, two quite small islands, are really leading the way with some really innovative projects. And I think it's really interesting. And,
Thanks.
And one final observation before I move on to my short presentation is I was at the the London Transport Museum in London, obviously, yesterday evening for a presentation by Network Rail, and part of the exhibits in the London Transport Museum is an 1890 electric underground train. So it's 130 years old underground train, run on electricity. So it just goes to show that electric technology is not as modern as we perhaps think it is. So 130-year-old electric loco on display in the museum. So that was interesting, I thought. Okay, a very quick update from me then before we go into the final interactive session on the seafront problem in Hastings. This is an update on my previous presentation. So you'll be aware that we have a long seafront in Hastings. It connects the old town, which is to the right of your screen at the east, to connects right along the seafront to the western end, what we call West Marina, and we have a real problem because we can't run buses from one end to the other. So what we're looking for is a dedicated east-west link. I say no public transport runs regularly at the moment from one end to the other, and we're looking at a dedicated public transport link running the whole length of the seafront, connecting the overheated old town in the east to the much less heavily used and in need of greater visitors part of the seafront to the west. So ideally it will be covered, so available all year round. There are things called Dotto trains, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, which are open and not great if it's wet or windy, and certainly not very good if it's cold. We want it to be sustainably powered, and so I'm really impressed with what I've been hearing this morning and we've heard previously about carbon neutral and sustainable transport. So we want it to be sustainably powered, obviously. Fully accessible, needs to carry wheelchairs, pushchairs and bikes. But particular geography of Hastings, and again, those of you who came here back in March will know that we have a very tight, very narrow road network in the old town. It's not possible to even turn a relatively small vehicle. We've heard about shorter vehicles today, but we haven't got the space to even have a turning circle for a relatively short vehicle. So ideally it will have a cab at each end, so it can go straight into a narrow road and straight back out again if the driver changes ends. It needs to be one person operated, and ideally be able to drive on the pavement because the seafront is very congested, and if it can run on the pavement, obviously it can bypass the congestion on the roads. There are challenges. The vehicle doesn't currently exist, but similar ones do. So you've got some vehicles which fulfill some of the criteria, but not one vehicle fulfills all of the criteria that we currently want. So we're looking at how we can improve that. There are issues about running on the pavement. There are structures on the pavement. The pavement is quite weak in places, and we need to understand the loadings, particularly if we have traditional lead acid batteries as a form of storing the electricity. Lead acid batteries are particularly heavy, and we have worries about the structure of our seafront. The concrete is very old. It has concrete cancer in places, so that's an issue. We need a detailed business case, and as I mentioned when I gave the presentation previously, we need to discuss whether or not it's worth coming off the seafront. At the moment, the main fault is that we do just run up and down the seafront, but there was just an equally strong argument for serving the two main railway stations in Hastings. If we can join those up with the seafront, then we've got a much more complete, a much better sustainable public transport solution. So where are we? Well, we've now appointed our consultants, Steer. Used to be called Steer Davis Gleave. I'm sure some of you in the transport world in particular will have heard of Steer. Probably the most well-known specialist transport consultancy in Great Britain, do work around the world, and we are very pleased that we have a very senior team working with us, and I must admit I'm slightly surprised that they've chosen, it's a relatively modest commission, but we've had some very senior colleagues from Steer already down to look at what we want to do with Hastings. So we held our reception meeting earlier this month, and we're working with the stakeholders with some workshops next month in June. One of the key challenges is how we deal with disability groups. There are issues about making it very accessible. Some of the disability groups are nervous about the impact of a quiet vehicle running on the pavement to those who are deaf or those who've got impaired mobility. So that's going to be a real challenge for us to see how we do it. So then we're doing some demand forecasting operations and hopefully working with the survey that Derek's been working on. We're discussing that, how best to incorporate that work during our peak summer. So that'd be June, July, August. Then by the end of August, we're hoping that our consultants will have worked up two good options, and hopefully this phase of the work will be complete by the end of September with a business case and a final report. So that's a very quick update with where we are in Hastings, and by my reckoning we're actually running about 6 or 7 minutes late now, which I don't think is too bad given the technical problems we've had today, but it's been a really effective session I think so far. So I'm going to hand over now to Manus for the interactive session and the wrap up. So thank you very much for listening to me. Hi, we're just about to unmute everybody. So Fiona's here with me in the room. You're just all about to be unmuted, so you will be able to join in. But I'd ask that Manus chairs this I'm sure he will very effectively, so that not everyone shouts at once, because that will be a bit confusing for all of us. So I'll pass over to Manus now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I wasn't, didn't have the mic on before. I said, thanks very much for the presenters, and it seems that we're on target with at least with 3 destinations we've heard about, and to progress into the feasibility studies, which is the big step, the next step, and the survey, which we have to capture the peak season in destinations where the summer is the peak season. We should have the common part of the survey completed by the end of August, early September, so that we can make some comparisons between sites to see what are the issues, which are the issues for destinations in terms of mobility, tourism mobility, and also to see in particular what are the next steps, the biggest. You will hear me. Okay. Now I think
So we're back, Manus. What happened then is that Fiona unmuted everybody, and suddenly there was lots and lots of background noise that deafened everybody. So we're going to unmute everybody again. Can we ask people, if possible, to be very quiet in the background, because it got a bit chaotic then? So the microphones are very, very strong and effective, and we need people to be very quiet. If we unmute everybody, please. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know how much of what I said has been heard. I'll say it again. Well, as what I said was that it seems that we're on target, at least with the three destinations.
Lui è on. Ok, quindi in un caso ha dei numeri, ma in un altro caso...
Però sono diverse le pratiche. Gestisci un milione, gestisci comunque un altro.
Allora, questo aspetta, è ancora peggio. No, è ancora peggio perché questa è la teoria, poi la realtà che loro non stanno, pochissimi stanno
I
lavorando.
don't know where the background noise comes from.
It's from other people talking, Manners, unfortunately.
Everybody's off. It's only us that are on.
Yeah, Manners, I think what we're going to have to do is just allow you to wrap up, and then we will unmute, ask people to try again once you finish talking. So we'll mute everybody again, let you talk, and then we'll try for final time once you finish talking.
Okay, fine. Well, what I said before, and I say it for the last time, hopefully, is that we're doing fine. We're on target with at least with the three destinations we heard about, Madeira, Mallorca, and Hastings. In terms of the progress with the feasibility study, and the next step is to make sure that we carry out the survey in all 9 destinations during the peak time. If the peak time is the summertime, then we have to capture this season coming up, July, August, September maybe. So we have some common basis to compare the common part of the survey. Of course, destinations can customize and include their own priorities linked to their feasibility study, which again follows on from that. We have until the end of until the middle of next year for that, so that we can have the local valuable results from the survey and the follow-on to feasibility study, which is very important for this low carbon transport for destinations. And the next event will be in Bremerhaven on the 26th of September on intermodality, and then we'll take up other issues regarding to promote intermodality for visitors, destinations, and that could be also linked to the feasibility studies in some destinations, not in all, but in some destinations that want to focus more on intermodality rather than on the low carbon transport systems. But so far we're doing okay, and I wonder if other destinations have something to update us on, if you can bring them in. I know Lake Balaton is on, Thessaloniki, Paphos. Anybody who has anything to offer, welcome. Thanks, Kevin. Over to you.
Hello, can you hear me from Thessaloniki?
Yes, we can hear you. I'm really sorry, we just can't hear everybody because when we unmuted, lots and lots of background noise came in and it just deafened us. So if anyone's got a question, I think the easiest thing is to type it in the message box and we will then unmute you. So please type in who you are and that you'd like to talk, and Fiona will then unmute you. Thank you.
Hello from Thessaloniki, can you hear us? Unfortunately, from the beginning, we registered as attendee on listening mode, and we could not speak. We were muted, but we want to. Can you hear me?
Is there anybody?
Yeah, we can all hear you. It's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we want to thank you, all of the partners for the presentations, Mr. Derek, and also the partners from Madeira, Mallorca, and from Hastings. From our part, we are preparing the works for the survey, for the joint survey. We are closing now the questionnaire with the questions aimed to our local action plan, and we are looking forward for the next activities with you. I don't know if you could hear me, but
Yes, we heard you very clearly from Thessaloniki. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We haven't got any more questions coming through. I don't know if anyone does want to talk, but please do. Manus, we've not got any more questions, so perhaps you'd like to wrap up for the final time?
I don't know if anybody else is online from the other destinations, from Latvia. Is anybody there? From Paphos, from Lake Balaton? If not, it seems that we're on target for the second report, and we have enough material to work with regarding the feasibility studies and its destination and the survey. So we should move forward now to close this semester, which finishes on Friday, tomorrow. And then we'll have the second report to prepare in the next couple of months. We'll remind you about activity reports, financial reports, and so forth on Monday. And the next event, as I said, will be in Bremerhaven, as we arranged it, the 26th of September, 25, 26, if I'm not mistaken. And we'll need to prepare for that. We need to do some preparations for that on intermodality. We'll remind you, we'll send a form to fill in, and your presentations, of course, should start from now as soon as possible. But to close this webinar, I think, despite the technology problems, it's been very useful. I hope the 27 or 29 people that were online, or 30 people at some point, found it useful and can use the presentations in their local work. The experience, I think, coming from Claudio, from Civitas Destinations is quite important, and we should make maximum use of that. Civitas Destinations is a very big project in Horizon 2020. There's a lot of resources, there's a lot of activities, including demonstrations on the ground, which we don't have. And therefore, we said from the beginning, and that's why Horaris de Fonsal is a partner, to share this information with us. And I was fortunate to be involved in the Civitas Destinations workshop that took place in Elba Island, Porto Ferreo, in April. And a lot of material that comes out of that Civitas Destinations project is very applicable, and we should make maximum use of it. There is a report on mobility as a service for Elba, and there were various other presentations. I'm sure Claudia can share this with us in due course. And the other point was the smart destinations principle that UNW, the World Organization, is promoting, which includes multimodality, alternative transport modes, destinations. It includes accessibility, which is a topic we investigate now in Mallorca, and also the usability of serving the visitor with electric mode. Electricity and electric mobility is very strong in smart destinations. And we should be looking out for the next Smart Destinations Conference, which we don't know when it will take place. It hasn't been announced. Usually it takes place around this time. Maybe it will be in the second half of the year. And this is particularly interesting for us, for DESTI SMART, because we have a lot to share with the WTO initiative. So Civitas Destinations from Funchal, from Madeira, and Smart Destinations from WTO, two very strong synergies exploit. We can use this information in our work for the local capability studies, which then will lead into actions for the action plans. And we should start thinking from now, even if it seems a bit early, what actions, concrete actions that will be included in the action plans, which will start in phase 2. And phase 2 is another year and a half from now. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in Bremerhaven, unless there's somebody else who wants to say anything. By all means, I conclude with this.
We've got no more questions on the screen, Manas, so I think that's it. And I found it really useful today. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution and for everybody else's. Thank you very much from Hastings.
Okay, great.